Good evening, everyone. First, let me go ahead and acknowledge the Florida Humanities support for this program that you're about to see. Florida Humanities is state affiliated with the National Endowment of the Humanities. Florida Humanities funds and coordinates public humanity programs and publications that explore the people, places, and ideas that shape our state. In addition to the Florida Talk program, Florida Humanities provides grant funding for cultural institutions, brings traveling Smithsonian exhibits to rural and underserved communities, and publishes Forum, award-winning magazine. Private contributions are critical to sustaining the programs of the Florida Humanities. For more information on the organization and how to support it, please visit floridahumanities.org. Thank you. With that, I would like to welcome Peggy McDonald. And I want to go ahead and thank everyone on this very special Earth Day to joining us. And that I want to remind everyone that Peggy, during Peggy's presentation, use that Q&A session to post questions. I'm Renee, and I'm on the board of the Friends of Wakulla Springs, and we, in partnership with the Florida Humanities, are bringing this free service in a series to you all. Tonight, once again, it's Earth Day, and Peggy McDonald's going to speak to us about Marjorie Carr. Peggy McDonald is a historian and adjunct professor for Stetson University. She's a native Floridian, and she does speaker series for the Florida Humanities Talks programs. She's also a prolific writer, and she has written at many magazines, the Forum, Gainesville Magazine, Our Town, and Senior Times. And the book that Marjorie Carr, Defender of Florida's Environment, is what we're going to be talking about. And Peggy, please come on in.
Hello.
Hey. I'm really excited about this presentation, and I am going to pass my my virtual podium over to you to sit back and enjoy and learn a little bit about a woman who is a very powerful woman in Florida history.
Thank you, Renee. You are a pro. That was so smooth.
Well, hardly.
You make it all easy. Thank you so much for inviting me on Earth Day to speak about one of my favorite Florida women, Marjorie Harris Carr. So we have a presentation here, and I'd like to point out that these images are largely from the collection of Mimi Carr, who is Marjorie and Archie Carr's eldest of 5 children. And without Mimi, I would not have been able to write this book that is, of course, placed right behind me, Marjorie Harris Carr, Defender of Florida's Environment. It began as my doctoral dissertation. So I have been really involved in Marjorie Carr's life for about 15 years now. And I originally became interested in this subject because I'm a Gainesville native. Tallahassee people, please forgive me. And my mother has been lifelong friends with Mimi Carr. And so she grew up hearing about the barge canal and the importance of conserving sea turtles. And it was such a close topic to me that it wasn't until I heard Jack Davis suggest Marjorie Carr as a topic for a doctoral dissertation. He was meeting with graduate students trying to encourage people to select topics in Florida history. We were all American history PhD students at UF. And so that's where it all clicked. And Jack Davis, if you're not familiar with him, went on to win the Pulitzer Prize for his book, The Gulf, which I highly recommend. Marjorie Carr was not a Florida native. She was born Marjorie Harris. Her parents, Charles and Clara Harris, were naturalists and teachers. Charles actually studied the law at Dartmouth, but turned his back on what would have been a lucrative career to instead teach Italian immigrant children in Boston. So Marjorie was born in Boston and had a thick Boston accent when she moved to rural Southwest Florida as a girl. She came to Florida in 1918. And in this picture, you can see, and this is one of the images from the Carr family collection that Mimi Carr let me scan. They are at Sanibel Island over a century ago, and Charles is teaching young Marjorie to study shells. In fact, the Harrises taught Marjorie how to identify thousands of specimens of flora and fauna, and she became interested from a young age in becoming a zoologist at a time when women didn't normally pursue that field. We'll get into that later. This is the house that Charles built by hand. It's a cracker style house, and this was Marjorie's upbringing. So being raised in rural Bonita Springs at a time when there wasn't even a bridge yet to take you from Fort Myers to the beach, when Florida had fewer than 1 million residents and was the least populous state east of the Mississippi, Marjorie was able to see Florida transform from this not untouched place, right, but still largely undeveloped state at the beginning of the 20th century to what became one of the most populous states by the end of the 20th century. And she witnessed firsthand how that affected the environment. Here you could see Marjorie fishing on the Imperial River. I don't think she really caught that large fish, but you can see this was her upbringing. She spent a lot of time on the water and learning about the land. In this picture, we can see the consequences, right, of all this exploitation of the land. Jack Davis, in his biography of Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, wrote that by the 1880s in Florida, about 2.5 million alligator hides had been harvested. And he compared that to destruction at the same time that was taking place out west with buffalo. So again, this was Marjorie's upbringing. She saw the effects of humans on the environment in Florida. She also talked later in an oral history interview about being a child growing up near the Everglades and watching the orange glow of the Everglades burning in the summers as it was cleared for agriculture. This is around the same time that many of the South Florida towns that we think of along Lake Okeechobee, for instance, such as Moore Haven, were really being developed, right, during the Great Florida Lamb Boom that soon became the bust. Here is an image of Marjorie Harris on her horse, Chiquita. This horse was really her best friend. If you look carefully at this image, you can see Marjorie is wearing a hat with short cropped hair in the 1920s. Her pants are rolled up, and she's wearing pants, right? She's not wearing a skirt. And remember, she had a thick Boston accent. This was her only friend, this horse, right, in rural Southwest Florida in the teens and 20s when she was a child. In this picture, you could see the Bonita Springs School, which only went up to the 8th grade. And Marjorie is pictured at the bottom row, the only girl. When it was time to go to high school, the Harris family moved to Fort Myers, which was still tiny, so that Marjorie could attend high school. And in this image, this is her senior picture from the Fort Myers High School yearbook. She graduated in 1932. I think she looks beautiful, but haunted. Tragically, Marjorie's father, Charles Harris, died suddenly from pneumonia when Marjorie was only 15 years old. So this was during the Great Depression. The family had their savings in a bank, and there was a series of bank failures that wiped out their savings. And he died just a few months shy of being able to collect a pension from his teaching. He would continue to go to the to teach during the winter, go up north to Boston. So there was no money for the family, and Marjorie's mother taught in Sanibel in a one-room schoolhouse. And Marjorie, more than anything, her daughter Mimi said, dreamed of going to college. Now, the problem with wanting to go to college in 1932 when you're a woman is that there were different views of women's place in society, right? Very much still influenced by 19th century thought. Now, this book, Sex in Education, A Fair Chance for the Girls, written by Dr. Edward Clark, was so popular it went through multiple editions. Whenever you're writing a book, you really should start with the word sex if you want to sell it, right? Now, when we see prescriptive literature like this becoming popular and going through multiple editions, what this means is it's actually a reaction to what's going on. So in this book, Dr. Clark argued that education was bad for girls and particularly college-age women's health. That all this reading and thinking big thoughts and discussing books just sucked the blood out of their ovaries and up into their brains, and they became sterile. In fact, in this book, Dr. Clark talks about an incident where there was a girl who died. It was death by college, right? Even though he wasn't present at the autopsy. So his view was that education was bad for girls and women. But the reason he was writing this book, right, is that more women than ever were going to college after the Civil War. Now, what did this mean for women like Marjorie Harris, who wanted to become scientists, right? She knew from the time she was a girl, she wanted to study zoology. They were funneled into domestic science, right, home ec. So here at Cornell University, you can see female students at the laundry lab. Now, I've had some of my male students in the past ask me if they could get college credit for laundry lab. No, it's no longer available. But at the time, really well into the 20th century, women who were interested in science were funneled into home economics, domestic science, or euthenics, right? Where they would they would learn to apply modern management techniques to the laundry, to managing a home, right? And so fortunately for Marjorie Harris, at Florida State College for Women, there was a strong liberal arts tradition. So instead of the laundry lab, we see female students here in the chemistry lab. So Florida State College for Women had such a strong liberal arts tradition that it received the Alpha Charter of Phi Beta Kappa, ahead of University of Florida, which was all male. And in addition, in terms of Marjorie Harris's education, of 7 state women's colleges across the South and in Oklahoma, only Florida State College for Women had that liberal arts option, right? Women could still choose a more traditional finishing school approach if that's what they wanted, but they could also choose this liberal arts connection. And there was a very strong science program. And Marjorie Harris actually studied with some early ecologists, and it opened her eyes to the possibilities. Well, when she graduated in 1936, here she is in her Florida State College for Women regalia. She was Phi Beta Kappa, a member of the Sigma Psi Honor Society, and a charter member of the Florida Academy of Sciences. However, when she applied to the ornithology program at Cornell, the director, Arthur Allen, told her point blank that women were not welcome in the field. She wasn't able to pursue graduate school at the time, but because it was the New Deal, there were other opportunities. Marjorie Harris was hired as the first female federal wildlife technician at the Willaca National Fish Hatchery. Now, through this position, she met, and we could see here the pools at the Willaca National Fish Hatchery. The whole point was a conservation mindset, right? That nature is a set of resources to be protected for human use and consumption. So when the fish supplies are running out for some reason, that they should be restocked, right? Rather than studying the reason for the declining fish supplies. So through this position, there was also an aviary. So Marjorie was able to work with whole live birds like she had hoped to do at Cornell. Also through this position, Marjorie met the 2 great loves of her life, the Ocklawaha River, which you can see in this postcard from the Matheson History Museum. This is titled The Romantic Ocklawaha River. In this image showing the Hiawatha, the last of the great Hart-line steamers on the Ocklawaha River, you could see the Hiawatha at night had a giant torch to light up all the wildlife. So people came down, snowbirds, right? From January through April, came to the Ocklawaha to see this subtropical paradise and also to shoot at anything that moved. Well, in addition to the Ocklawaha, through this position at the fish hatchery, Marjorie was working with some quail and noticed that they were sick. And she wanted to use laboratory equipment to find out what was wrong with them. Her boss didn't support her doing this on company time. So on her own time, Marjorie Harris drove to Gainesville to the all-male University of Florida with a box of sick quail to use the lab equipment, the microscopes at night. Well, you can see in this postcard also from the Matheson that even the University of Florida, even the science building, one of the first two buildings, academic buildings at University of Florida, was portrayed as something in paradise, right? With all this lush landscaping. Inside the building, she met Archie Carr, and the two were married for 50 years and had 5 children together. Now, normally, when a woman scientist married, it was considered professional suicide. Not for Marjorie Carr. When she married Archie, he was a fellow zoologist who was also fascinated by Florida's flora and fauna, and they went collecting together. He supported her interest in science at a time when women were not welcome in the field. In this picture, we could see their outfits from what was called a troth pledging ceremony. What happened was when Marjorie Harris still went back to Alachua to report her findings from the lab, a colleague, a male colleague, took credit for her work. When Marjorie challenged him and told her boss, of course, that she was the one who had come to this discovery at the lab at University of Florida, her boss fired her. So this is the end of 1936, the height of the Great Depression. Archie Carr was madly in love with Marjorie, but could not marry her because he made only $40 a month. He was finishing his dissertation, and he pulled some strings to find a new job for her in Englewood, Florida, which was a 6-hour drive by bus. Made it very hard for them to see each other, but that way she would be employed. And the secret was he thought they should get married first. He was convinced that she would find someone else, someone better. He always made self-deprecating jokes. He thought she would find someone with better looking and smarter and marry him. So they eloped. On their wedding night, Marjorie and Archie returned home to her mother's house at 2 a.m. And she lectured them on the perils of going out at night to look at the moon, which is what they had told her they were doing. Marjorie contritely went to bed with her mother, and Archie slept on the couch on their wedding night. After that, they spent 2 days in Gainesville at a tin can tourist camp. And if you look carefully at this image, you can see that horse-drawn or mule-drawn wagons mixed with early automobiles. After that brief honeymoon, Marjorie tearfully got on the bus and went to Englewood. Once she was there, she was trained how to collect everything from cockroaches to alligators, preserve the specimens, and then the specimens were shipped up north to universities such as Harvard. You can see in this picture, she's 21 years old. She's a newlywed, right? And she's with Luther Goldman, who was a future National Geographic wildlife photographer, and holding a blue indigo snake. And Mimi pointed out to me when I scanned this photo how gently she was holding the snake. She couldn't have been happier. In fact, in a series of love letters that Archie and Marjorie wrote each other for over half a year, he said he thought she was a little too happy without him. But Marjorie had to conceal her marriage, because if her employer found out she was married to Archie Carr, she would be fired. During the Depression, even women who were teachers were expected to resign upon marriage. Teaching became a lucrative position when about a quarter of all Americans were unemployed. So Marjorie concealed her marriage, and Archie wrote letters to Miss Margie Harris. After about half a year, they did reveal the truth. Archie graduated with a PhD. Fast forward in time to the point where Marjorie Harris completed her master's degree in 1942, studying the bass she had encountered at the Ocklawaha River, almost a decade earlier. And she'd had her first child, Mimi, in 1943, and then had given birth to her second child, Archie Carr III. And she boarded a puddle hopper with her infant baby and her toddler, and went to Honduras. Now, Archie was employed in a wonderful position teaching at the agricultural college at El Zamorano, which gave him a light teaching schedule, so he had time to research his unique theories about sea turtle migration. He wanted to go where the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans met to find out if any of his theories were right. Of course they were. While he was there, the Carrs had a lot of time to go collecting. In this picture, you can see Marjorie Carr holding, unfortunately, a dead toucan. I'm a bird lover, but scientists at the time, the way they would identify birds and be able to report where they were, where their habitat was to shoot them, right? To preserve them. Now, the really exciting thing about what's left from all of these preserved specimens in museums and universities around the world is that that's where all the exciting research is going on today, as people at universities and museums have digitized their collections. So chances are that toucan might be on display here in Gainesville, Florida at the Museum of Natural History or at the American Museum of Natural History. This is where thousands of Marjorie Carr's bird specimens for the scientific research skins were sent to be part of the collections. How did Marjorie do this? Well, because she wasn't officially employed, right? She wasn't employed at the agricultural school like Archie was. Archie made a good enough salary that they had faculty housing. They were able to afford a cook, a nanny, a gardener, a laundress. And here you can see beautiful Tina caring for Archie Carr III on the left and Mimi on the right, and they're dining by candelabra. Marjorie Carr wrote her mother from during the first year they were in Honduras and talked about how amazing it was to wake up at 6 a.m. and find horses saddled to go off with her husband on an adventure, exploring the cloud forest, and to return and find all the children bathed, fed, and in bed, warm bread and soup waiting in the kitchen, and all the laundry cleaned and folded and ironed. She told her mother that they realized it was the best life they would ever lead. Here in this picture, you can see, if you look very carefully, Marjorie Carr on the right is seated next to her son and daughter. And one of Mimi Carr's first memories is of what's going on in this picture. Marjorie is stuffing cotton into the dead bird's body until it comes out of its eyeballs. And Mimi remembered her doing the same procedure over and over, thousands of times with German dissection tools. At the left, the gentleman is J.C. Dickinson. He later became the director of the Museum of Natural History, Florida's oldest state museum in Gainesville. After the Carrs left Honduras, they were there for about 4.5 years. And after World War II, they returned to the Gainesville area, and they rented a house in Gainesville, just down the road from my mother. And my mother grew up with, as I mentioned, Mimi. They are still good friends today. While they were building a house in Micanopy. So Micanopy is about 10 miles south of Gainesville, separated by Paynes Prairie. And in this image, you can see a gorgeous live oak tree, and what's now the Micanopy History Museum. Well, when all the children, all 5 of Marjorie and Archie's children were school age, Marjorie branched out into town beautification. Now, unlike Honduras, where the Carrs had a laundress and a cook and a nanny, in Micanopy, Marjorie didn't have help with the large family and all the responsibilities that went along with maintaining the home. So again, when they reached school age, she was starting town beautification work, and she convinced the town elders of Micanopy to preserve 1,000 live oaks that they were considering destroying for expansion, right, for development. by preserving these live oaks, the turn of the 20th century buildings in Micanopy are still here today. So if you've ever seen the Michael J. Fox movie, Doc Hollywood, it was filmed at Micanopy because it really looked like, Mayberry, right? To this day, there are no chain stores, restaurants. There is one flashing yellow and red light, and all these beautiful old buildings and live oaks are preserved. And then Marjorie branched out from town beautification to land preservation. In this image from the Matheson, you could see in the early 20th century snowbirds coming to Paynes Prairie when it was known as Alachua Lake, because it's natural for the prairie to become flooded periodically. It's actually been flooded about the past 4 years, and it looks like a giant lake at the prairie. William Bartram visited the prairie in the late 18th century. And I'm going to fast forward to this picture today. So Marjorie Carr worked with the Garden Club, the Gainesville Garden Club, for about a decade. These activists worked to preserve this unique swath of land and to turn it into a state park and preserve. And once they had accomplished that feat of securing a state park, in 1971, they went about the business of restoring this land to as closely as possible to what William Bartram saw when he visited in 1774. So they actually imported buffalo from out west, and there are still wild horses that are the descendants of this horses Spaniards brought to the prairie in the 1500s. Now, at the same time, Marjorie Carr was working with other activists to preserve Paynes Prairie. Archie Carr, teaching zoology at University of Florida, heard that Lake Alice, where he took students to conduct scientific experiments, was going to be partially drained, and that a 4-lane cross-campus throughway was going to be built along with a 2,000-car parking lot at the lake. Over a period of about a couple of years, Archie and Marjorie Carr, Jack Kaufman, another zoology professor, Joe Little, a law professor, worked to get the University of Florida administration to agree to public hearings. UF and Florida Department of Transportation had pushed this plan, which was considered a done deal with no public input. Marjorie Carr also had a talent for calling up any paper in Florida and having a way of encouraging them to take a different stance on an editorial issue. So the St. Petersburg Times, one of the nation's top newspapers, published articles about Lake Alice, right? In the end, the lake was saved, and today it's one of the gems in the Gainesville area. And you can always count on seeing an alligator if you visit Lake Alice. At the same time that Marjorie Carr was working to save Paynes Prairie and Lake Alice, she was also working on the project she's most known for. So this picture shows a bridge stanchion from what was then called the Cross Florida Ship Canal. During the Great Depression, some funding, right, limited funding was put towards slowly building a ship canal that would tie together the Atlantic and Gulf coasts. So there would be an inland waterway that would, again, allow some industry. Now, FDR was willing to try just about anything to get the economy going during the Great Depression, including this plan. But once FDR shifted his focus to becoming the arsenal for democracy and then entering World War II, there was no more money to waste on this project, right? Which was, again, a way to pump money into a good public works project that then, a not so good public works project, funding was cut, right? So it was initially authorized in 1942. The congressional appropriations for the project ceased because of World War II. 20 years later, in 1962, the project was reborn. There was congressional authorization for funding for a different version of the canal, the Cross Florida Barge Canal. This is an image of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers plan for Florida's future. If you look carefully, you can see the Panhandle is placed at the bottom of the map. It was considered a separate district It's symbolic, however, that Florida is being altered this way. And throughout the state, there are water projects, including channelizing the Kissimmee River, draining the Everglades, and building the Cross Florida Barge Canal. Now, this affected Marjorie Carr personally because she had first fallen in love with the Ocklawaha River in 1936 when she heard about this project in 1962 from a colleague living in Jacksonville who was heavily involved with the Garden Club. She began to examine the issue and to try to work not against the canal, but to divert the canal from the Ocklawaha River. That was the plan at first. Now, she was working out of the Alachua Audubon Society, which she co-founded with David Anthony. Later, in 1969, Carr, David Anthony, and others co-founded Florida Defenders of the Environment, a single issue organization dedicated to stopping the canal altogether. And they compiled this report, an early environmental impact statement, not the first, right, but one of the early reports. And it examined the impact of the canal. It talked about the history, the cultural history and natural history of the Ocklawaha. And it also looked at the economic side of the canal, right? From any one of these standpoints, whether it was the legal canal, the legal argument, the environmental argument, the economic argument, or the moral argument, the environmental impact statement made it clear that this canal was a boondoggle, that it was going to lead to saltwater intrusion in the Ocklawaha, and that the cost to benefit ratio was exaggerated. And there was no financial gain, right, that would be recovered from the construction of this canal. Moreover, FDE argued that the Ocklawaha deserved to be preserved on its own merit as a beautiful wild river. Well, Marjorie oversaw the editing and the compilation of this environmental impact statement, and she cajoled a variety of experts into working on this for free. When it was completed, she shared it with every major newspaper in the state and also publications outside the state, including Time Magazine. And she organized a letter of about 150 scientists to Richard Nixon, imploring him to take action to stop construction of the canal. In 1971, there was a combination of an executive order by Richard Nixon and a successful federal lawsuit that halted construction of the canal. However, it was about 1/3 complete. In this image, you can see highlighted versions showing the completed portions of the canal, including the most controversial remnant today, the Rodman Dam, also known as the George Kirkpatrick Dam. This small earthen dam prevents the Ocklawaha River from flowing north into the St. Johns River, and it prevents the a variety of endangered species from being able to navigate it through the locks. In this image at the top, you can see the wild, narrow, winding Ocklawaha River in 1949, before the dam was closed later in 1968. In the bottom image, you could see roughly what the flooded river looks like today. So here's a picture of a mother and a calf, manatees that are affected by this dam. If you'd like to find out more about the dam, I highly encourage you to watch the documentary Lost Springs by Matthew Keene. And Margaret Tolbert is an abstract expressionist artist, and her art is a very big part of this documentary, which is also produced by Karen Chadwick. Here you could see Margaret Tolbert painting Cannon Springs, which is one of the hidden gems. These are beautiful springs that are flooded by the artificially high water levels at the Rodman impoundment. Every 3 to 5 years, the water levels are lowered so that water weeds that are choking this artificially managed environment can be cleared out to an extent. During these drawdowns that last several months, the springs that are normally hidden, right, these lost springs of the Ocklawaha River come back to life. People flock there. They, they kayak there. Artists like Margaret Tolbert try to capture the magic of these springs. Lostsprings.org is where you can watch this documentary for free and learn more. Also the Florida Defenders of the Environment and Free the Ocklawaha River websites. This is an image I took while going with Karen Chadwick on a boat tour during the November drawdown of 2019, before the pandemic. And if you look carefully, you can see the dark water level where these cypress trees are normally flooded. And during the drawdown, cypress shoots come up out of the ground and through the water. And there's all this regrowth that then is drowned again at the end of the drawdown. This image shows the Ocklawaha long before the dam, right? When snowbirds came from around the country and around the world to take in the beauty of the Ocklawaha River. Should the dam be removed, which was Marjorie Carr's dying wish, there's a sincere interest in renewing these riverboat tours on the Ocklawaha. And I'd like to close on a positive note because Marjorie Carr was a very positive, optimistic woman. And towards the end of her life, she mused about how beautiful it will be when the dam is removed and we can see the manatees in the river once again. She said, it isn't too late to save the Ocklawaha. Thank you for listening. And I see we have some questions in the Q&A.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. Let's pull them up. That was really wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much. Let's see what here. So we have a person asking, how did you get access to all the photos and stories about Marjorie Carr?
I am indebted to Mimi Carr, who is Marjorie and Archie Carr's eldest child, eldest of their five children and the only daughter. And she allowed me to scan these amazing photos. And also she shared all kinds of documents with me, including a set of love letters that Archie and Marjorie wrote to each other early in their marriage when they were separated, right? Because she had to conceal her marriage and work elsewhere during the Great Depression. In terms of the story of Marjorie Carr, part of that was fleshed out over years where I would interview Mimi Carr, but also through these different documents and historic newspapers. And I was so lucky, though, to have that friendship with Mimi Carr, who allowed me access to these reports and documents. There's also the Florida Defenders of the Environment papers are available in the University of Florida Special Collections at the P.K. Young Library of Florida History. So those are voluminous and very helpful. I hope that answers that question.
That does. Thank you. Thank you. This is a very interesting question. Who are our current Marjorie Carrs of today?
You know, that's a really good question.
Yeah.
There's an organization now called the Marjories, and it's indifferent. You know, the name refers to Florida's three Marjories, Marjorie Carr, who's really the lesser known of the three, and Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, who of course wrote about and worked to save the Everglades, and Marjorie Canal Rawlings. This group of journalism students who studied under Cynthia Barnett formed this online publication, The Marjorie, and they examine many different women like this, right? Examples of women who are fighting for the environment, but also Marjorie Harris Carr's granddaughter, Jenny Carr, is now president of Florida Defenders of the Environment. So there's still that family connection at FDE. FDE has been working for more than half a century to remove the remnants of the Rodman Dam and pool, and to push for a free-flowing Ocklawaha River. So again, if you'd like more information, the Florida Defenders of the Environment website, the Restore the Ocklawaha River, or I'm sorry, Free the Ocklawaha River website, and also the wonderful, it's just a majestic documentary called Lost Springs, which you can see for free at lostsprings.org. It has been on different Florida PBS stations many times. I'm sure it will be again, but you can see it for free anytime at lostsprings.org.
Wow. What an incredible presentation and phenomenal insight. Thank you very much. What is the current status of the Cross Florida Barge Canal?
And another good question. So the barge
Yeah.
canal's defunct. Unlike other dams across the nation that have served a purpose, like such as hydroelectricity, the Cross Florida Barge Canal is defunct, right? Richard Nixon issued executive order to halt construction, and there was a federal lawsuit that FDE and EDF, Environmental Defense Fund, filed, that the combination of those two halted construction of the barge canal. But in terms of the dam itself, it remains, right? It has remained since 1968. So unlike other dams that serve a purpose, this one serves no purpose and is actually destructive, right? Because it's preventing not only endangered species from navigating the Ocklawaha, they can't get through the locks. There have been instances where manatee have been killed over the years, but also the water itself needs to flow freely from the Ocklawaha to the St. John's, and the water health of the Silver Springs, right? One of Florida's earliest nature attractions is threatened, and the quality and quantity of the fish are affected, right? They're in decline because this unique ecosystem that's interconnected between Silver Springs and the Ocklawaha and the St. John's, and it's blocked by that dam. So federal action was what was necessary to stop construction of the barge canal. Federal action will be necessary to free the river, because time after time, every governor from Ruben Askew to Charlie Crist supported removing the dam. And then there's been inaction because of really a false claim that this artificially managed pool of water is an ecosystem, right? Or that it's good for fishing, when studies show that fishing is better in a free river than in a shallow pool of water. Sorry, I hope that wasn't too long-winded.
Not at all, not at all. I think I want to ask a follow-up question with that is, do you know of any current legislative, either at the federal or state level, action to have this addressed?
There are continuing lawsuits. In particular, Florida Defenders of the Environment, working with partner organizations, has sued the state because the permit to operate the dam has expired. One of the great strengths, there are many great strengths, but one of them in Florida Defenders of the Environment is Joe Little, the longtime vice president, who worked closely with Marjorie Carr, both on the efforts to stop construction of the canal and later to deauthorize the canal, but also on the effort to save Lake Alice. Joe Little is a seasoned, highly respected professor of law who shares his expertise, who lends his expertise for free, right, in these multiple lawsuits on behalf of the Ocklawaha and also other Florida issues. So there's always at least one lawsuit in the works approaching this problem from a different perspective, right? When one hasn't worked, there's a new tactic. So unfortunately, so far, we haven't seen action. And again, it's been over a half century that the dam has been in place. But with new traction, right, with a changeover in the EPA in particular, and a new administration at the federal level, perhaps the time will come, right, where this river can run free again.
Wow. One of our guests has asked, has the Florida Barge Canal been a major contribution to saltwater intrusion for the South Florida area? Do you know anything about that?
It's a good question, and it likely would have been, except that it was stopped. So that was one of the main scientific arguments to prevent the construction, the completion of the canal. That was one of the main arguments that's made in FDE's environmental impact statement, that it would lead to saltwater intrusion. And Marjorie Carr wrote and spoke eloquently about this, and she had a good sense of humor as well. She said how she met, right, with the head of the Army Corps of Engineers in Florida in Jacksonville for lunch. And it turned out that there had been no studies done whatsoever on the aquifers that would be involved. That it was thought that there was just this one aquifer, and it was a monolith, right? Where the aquifer, there are different depths and heights across different parts of Florida. And so if the measurements and the study of one part of the Floridan aquifer might not apply to other portions of it. So they really were going in blindly, right? The Corps of Engineers, and proceeding with construction of this canal without an environmental impact study, because it wasn't required then. The FDE study really set an important precedent that other environmental groups across the nation were able to use. So had the canal been completed, the barges would have come across the canal. There would have been saltwater intrusion into the Floridan aquifer, and it would have affected areas, not just north central Florida. But because it wasn't completed, because this small group of committed citizens were able to bring an end to this major Corps of Engineers project already under works, right? Already underway. Yeah. It shows the power of a small group of committed individuals in helping not only their own backyard, right? But this had ramifications across the state of Florida and then nationally in terms of an approach. How do you stop a project that is going to be dangerous to the environment?
That kind of actually goes right into the next question we have here. Environmental activism continues to this day. What can we learn about Marjorie's techniques to successfully inform and to promote environmental stewardship today?
We love to talk now about our elevator pitch, but Marjorie Carr had it down to one sentence: get the facts and then act. She, as a scientist, knew the value of studying a problem. And the interesting thing is that she and her fellow activists were working on this issue at the time when environmental law was brand new in Florida. This was when the environmental movement at the national level was still new. And so her approach to applying scientific studies, right, getting hydrologists and zoologists, right, even to study the impact on the river and forest ecosystem. The concept of ecology was just coming into people's dictum, right? When President Nixon announced on national TV that the project would be canceled because the Ocklawaha is a beautiful wild river, and he used terms including ecology, ecosystem, it changed everything. So this is a period of time where everything FDE was doing was revolutionary.
Wow. So stop and channel her for a minute. And what would Marjorie Carr give Governor DeSantis for guidance for environmental conservation for the next 5 years for Florida?
I have a feeling she would say he should listen to his advisors. So I know Tom Frazier was chief science officer that he's put in his initial first year in office. He put some really good measures in place. I'm not sure that Marjorie Carr would think that he had followed through, right? So installing good scientific officers and then taking their advice. Marjorie Carr was comfortable calling up any governor, right? Any Florida governor. She worked through Lady Bird Johnson and then was working on LBJ himself, right? She had the confidence to call anyone and to try to convince them, right, to do her bidding. She would have no qualms at all about seeking an audience with DeSantis, and FDE has also been working up the chain, right? Meeting with DeSantis's environmental officers, staffers. However, there's only so much that someone could accomplish if they're not listening to their scientific advisors.
That's very true. Did Marjorie Carr and Marjorie Stoneman Douglas ever work together? And did they know each other and were they friends?
These are the best questions. Yes, and yes. They did work together. There's a wonderful picture of Marjorie Carr and Marjorie Stoneman Douglas together with historian Michael Gannon when he was presenting Douglas with an honorary doctorate at UF. Marjorie Stoneman Douglas and Marjorie Carr worked together on panther preservation. There was a wonderful time when they appeared together and answered questions, and it was recorded, right? There's an audio recording of them answering questions about the environmental movement, about Florida's environment, about the problems at the national, international level. So they did know each other and work together. Marjorie Canaan Rawlings, however, Florida's third Marjorie, or the other of the three Florida Marjories, likely did not encounter either of them just based on the timing of when she was here and her untimely death. So in terms of being friends with them, Kimberly Voss is a journalism historian at UCF, and she has written about all the fun Marjorie Stoneman Douglas has had, that she would work with these other activists, that they worked hard, but they also had fun, and that they would, go back and forth between each other's houses, walking back and forth and drinking scotch and that sort of thing. So as hard as these people worked, right, they were friends and they did have fun together.
What is the current state of the Ocklawaha? And did Marjorie Carr actually make a difference for the river? That's a tough one.
She definitely made a difference because there would have been multiple dams on the rivers that would be part of the Cross Florida Barge Canal. So the dams on the rivers were going to provide a water source to allow the barges to travel across inland Florida, right? So you have these canals, and then with Lacucci and Ocklawaha, we're going to be majorly disrupted with multiple dams to provide that water source, right? So, so did she make a difference? Yes, absolutely. What she did was incredible. Multiple newspapers from around the nation contacted her when the construction was halted, because they wanted to know, how did this happen, right? This was a major Army Corps of Engineers project that was about 1/3 complete. No one thought it would be stopped, and she helped stop it. And the other part of the question was, what I forgot what the other part was.
Did her efforts make a lasting impact for the river's well-being?
Oh, I think the other part was, what is the condition of the Ocklawaha today? So the Ocklawaha was not a pristine river, right? No part of nature we have these masculine terms, virgin, untouched. It was none of those things, but it was a beautiful, wild river. And much of the part was through sheer luck, right? So the Ocklawaha was just through a part of Florida that largely had not been developed. And so this beautiful river was still there. Now, because of the dam, but also for other reasons, the river has been in decline for decades. One of the, in addition to the lack of water flow from the dam, there is herbicide. Herbicides are applied because of, again, this fact that you have this large artificially managed pool of water, and there are water weeds, therefore, because it's, the water is shallow, it's warm, water weeds develop, and so herbicides are constantly applied, and those herbicides don't go away, right? The water weeds might go away temporarily, but the poison remains. So the river is in a declining state, right? Because the scientists, again, really aren't being listened to in terms of the management of the river. That dam costs money to maintain, right? The lock structures are old, and removal would be cheaper. And studies going back to the time of Archie Carr showed that the river would be restored quickly, largely on its own. If you consider the Kissimmee River, when it went from being channelized to being restored to more of the natural course of the river, nobody predicted how quickly that restoration would be successful. And that's a much larger and much more expensive project than restoration of the Ocklawaha.
Well, that kind of leads into this question here. What other damaging dams currently are in Florida that are causing problems?
I would change, instead of dams, I would say water control measures, right? So in terms of the American Rivers Association, and they actually bust dams, right? They investigate problematic dams and remove them. Most people think that there aren't any dams in Florida, right? People think you have to have gravity, it's too flat in Florida. So the Ocklawaha's dam, right? The Rodman and George Kirkpatrick Dam is is one of those outliers. People don't think about dams in Florida, but in terms of drainage, right, there have been drainage efforts in the Everglades for over a century. And if we look at Lake Okeechobee as an example of manipulating an ecosystem and what the impact is on the larger ecosystem, it's an absolute catastrophe. And it seems every spring and summer we hear about the red tide being worse than ever, and about the problematic algal outbreaks and blue algae, and even how dangerous it has become to swim in the water, where you could get a flesh-eating bacteria, right, and die. So we're in a really critical state in Florida, across the state, right, in terms of our waters. And because we rely on tourism, it's really a no-brainer, right? We want that tourist dollar in Florida. We bet on it. We count on it. We need to clean up our waters for financial reasons, in addition to environmental reasons and moral reasons.
So has Archie and Marjorie's homestead been preserved?
Oh, another good question. Yes. So one thing I didn't mention in my talk, but it's in the book, is that Marjorie Carr's activist career in some way got informally kickstarted when I-75 was constructed literally through her backyard. So the Carr family had in the 1950s a roughly 200-acre homestead in Micanopy, and I-75 bisected that, right? It divided a portion of that homestead. And if you were to visit the homestead today, and it's not open to the public, but I've been there a couple of times, you hear the constant roar of I-75 traffic in their backyard, right? It's like the ocean, it's constant, just not a beautiful sound. So it is still there. Also across the way, down the road a little bit, is Pearl Country Barbecue. And David Carr, who was the youngest of the Carr's 5 children, and his wife Peggy own that charming restaurant. They have Wi-Fi, New York Times, and some of the best barbecue you'll ever eat, and amazing desserts too. But it's really a cultural mainstay, Pearl Barbecue, in the area. And I also see that someone had asked about where she's buried, and it ties in terms of, you want a connection if you'd like to visit. Both Archie and Marjorie Carr are buried at Gainesville's historic Evergreen Cemetery. There's a cell phone tour, so you could actually use the cell phone tour without even visiting. If you were just to Google Evergreen Cemetery, Gainesville cell phone tour. But they are both buried there together. Ironically, George Kirkpatrick, who was one of the biggest supporters of keeping the dam, is also buried there.
Thank you. Thank you. Was the channelization of the Kissimmee River part of the Cross Florida Canal project?
Although it wasn't connected, it was going on at the same time. So in that sort of Frankenstein Florida map that I shared, that was from 1965, a Corps of Engineers map, it was one of the many waterways projects that the Corps of Engineers had. So what that map really shows is that the Corps of Engineers at that time had this view of Florida as something to manipulate, right? Florida's waters were, they were free to manipulate them. Their official literature claims that they would never engage in a project unless there was a community demand for it, right? That there would have to be hearings for it. There would have to be public meetings where the people are requesting the project. But in reality, the Corps of Engineers, as we saw with the Barge Canal, they just moved forward to work on the projects they wanted. There was not a demand, right? There were no public hearings about the Barge Canal. It was imposed upon the people of Florida. And that was one of the things that FDE exposed.
We're almost out of time. I'm going to ask one more question here. The question is, I've passed the Marjorie Harris Carr overpass bridge on I-75 many times and wondering about it. Is it for animals to cross or part of a trail, or what's the story on that one?
That's a perfect question to close with. The Marjorie Carr Land Bridge is part of the Marjorie Harris Carr Cross Florida Greenway. So the lands that were set aside for the construction of the canal were then transformed into a greenway, and it became named for Marjorie Carr. Now, she was aware of that before she died in 1997. She was aware that there was a plan to name the greenway for her. And although she was honored, what she really wanted was for the river to be freed. So some people, talk about what a great thing. If it hadn't been for the barge canal, we wouldn't have this greenway. Well, we still have this dam. The greenway is a lovely place to visit, and that land bridge connects it. David Godfrey, who was the executive director of the Sea Turtle Conservation, which was founded originally by Archie Carr and others, said that was actually his idea, because if there wasn't a way to connect the two parts of the greenway to go over I-75, the greenway wouldn't be continuous. So it's over 110 miles of continuous greenway. And on the West Coast, the parts of the barge canal have been, everything's been closed down, right? They're not functional, but you could still view it, right? You could there through the greenway, you can still see parts of the completed canal. But you can also see the Great Florida Birdway and other natural parts of Florida that are preserved along the greenway.
Great, great. Well, let me share with everyone our closing screen here. And just I want first thank you, Peggy, for this wonderful presentation. Really, I learned so much about Marjorie Carr, and what an inspirational story. And on this very special day, Earth Day, I could not have asked for a better presentation for this. Audience members, you can pick up Peggy's book at Midtown Readers, who is partnering with the Friends of Springs series to get these books out to our authors, and please support our local Midtown Readers. This program brings to an end our spring virtual series for this spring, and we're going to be sending out a survey, and please take time to fill out that survey so we can help kind of address future presentations that you all might be interested in. Once again, please consider donating to the Friends of Ocklawaha Springs, and if you're not a member, please consider joining. Everyone, I hope you've gotten your vaccines, or you're well on your way to getting your vaccines. Good night, and stay safe.